So here's a shocker. Sonic Frontiers. I actually enjoyed this game. In fact, I actually really enjoyed this game. I was not expecting to say that. You know, I was hoping that the game would be good, but I was very unsure whether or not this was going to appeal to me beyond like the initial couple hours, you know, if it was going to have any longevity. Because the last time I played a Sonic game was Sonic 2006, and well, if you don't know how that went, well, good for you. The less known about that game, the better. But, you know, I used to play some of the Sonic games back, like, on the PlayStation 2 and, like, that era. I remember Shadow the Hedgehog and, you know, some other games like that. So, you know, needless to say, I've been away from Sonic for quite a long time. And jumping into this new concept, I was like, all right, it looks like they're trying to, you know, reinvigorate the franchise, bring it into a modern era, do something interesting with the license. You know, we now have this more kind of open world structure, more exploration. I was actually very curious to see what they could do, and we had series veterans for Sonic actually return and really, you know, develop this team. And so, you know, it had a lot of interesting things going for it. Now that I finally had time to sit down and play the game, in fact, I actually completed the game over this past weekend. It took me 16 hours to get through this game, which I feel was a good length, and I had a great time most of the run through. Let me explain why. So if you hear people talk about this game, often they'll describe it as an open world Sonic game. I don't think open world is the right term for this game because it's not so vast and the worlds aren't so huge that basically, you know, you're going to be sitting here for hours on end exploring the, you know, entire map. It's nothing like that. Instead, what they've opted for are like kind of larger based hubs. And you have different worlds, all these different worlds that you'll go to, and really they're islands is what they're calling them. So you have all these different islands that take place across these different worlds, and each one has a different art direction, and I think the size of them is appropriately well done. You know, it's probably going to take you around 5 to 10 minutes to actually, you know, run from one side of the map to the other, so it's not terribly large. You know, it's not overwhelming, and the content is spread out to the point where you can actually do a lot of side things on your way to your story objectives. And so you're not sitting here wasting hours on end doing like the same repetitive, you know, group of challenges or anything like that. There's a lot of stuff that's sort of just kind of on the way to the missions, and they, you know, take seconds if not minutes to actually complete. The way that you progress the story, however, is by doing what the game calls these cyberspace towers. These are very, very cool because they take the classic Sonic formula, you know, the 2D level design, sometimes there's 3D stages, 2.5D, so on and so forth. And it's traditional Sonic where you're trying to get through the level as fast as possible. There's collectible, you know, rings and different tags along the way. You can discover different routes, and the whole objective is to try and complete these stages as fast as possible while also mastering and completing the other objectives that they give you. I love all of these stages, and yeah, you know, some were challenging. Some of them took me a few times to actually get through, but they are very fun and they felt really rewarding. I couldn't really say I felt very frustrated with this game. Not to say that there aren't any frustrating moments in this game, it is a platformer after all. But I found these stages to be a welcome breath of fresh air because when you're kind of exploring this world, you know, doing this for long periods of time could elicit, you know, feelings of repetitiveness. And what these stages do is they help break that up because now this game transitions from sort of this, you know, exploration-esque 3D Sonic game into the more traditional 2D Sonic platforming games that you used to play, you know, on this old Sega consoles, and then some of the re-releases and remasters of those previous games on current gen systems. I thought that this was very well done, and the whole pacing of the game felt just right. The nice thing about this game is it doesn't overstay its welcome. With that being said, barring in mind the very end of the game where they actually ask you to find an absurd amount of collectibles just to reach the very end of the stage, they basically pad out the game an extra 2 hours because of this. And it's more frustrating than it is rewarding, although the ending is pretty epically done. I actually had a great time playing this, and I didn't feel like it was too long, and I also didn't feel like it was too short. The length felt right. And because you're doing a lot of different things, exploring these environments, as well as doing the more traditional Sonic 2D platforming gameplay, and then doing all these little side things on the end, I actually found myself really enjoying each world and what it had to offer, as well as the breadth of bosses that they actually introduced into these worlds. The bosses in this game are awesome. They're significant in scale. They require different patterns and different powers and skills to actually defeat them. And each stage has its own unique set of bosses to offer, so although the bosses respawn, you don't ever have to keep on doing them. You know, it's not the same fight over and over and over again, and there's a few in the game that I actually really enjoyed doing and didn't mind, you know, going back and actually replaying those fights again. I think if I was to summarize what the gameplay experience was like with Sonic Frontiers, I would say it's basically Nier Automata meets Shadow of the Colossus, except it's drenched within the Sonic speed and lore and story and all that stuff. It's all that sort of world and those mechanics. But it reminded me a lot of Nier Automata as well as Shadow of the Colossus, especially when it comes to those boss fights, because you're running up the side, like way up to some of these bosses, and they're huge. They take up the entire screen. It's very well done, and I actually really enjoyed just the combat mechanics in this game. I also have to give a nod to the soundtrack as well. This is a mixture of licensed music along with composed music for the game, and it mixes, you know, rock, metal, EDM, and just general pop music so well together. Each stage offers its own ambience and music, and it's just phenomenally well done. It kept me excited and energetic during my entire playthrough of the game, and it was mixed up so well that no track seemed to overstay its welcome. It was always exciting to see what they were going to play next. Again, the boss fights in particular have these great soundtracks that play when you're doing all this heavy damage, and it reminded me a lot of watching like a really epic anime. It has that sort of same style to it, where, you know, each boss has its own theme song, and you know, it's kind of like anime-esque inspired. So, you know, music in particular, I feel, is such a strong suit for one, and one of the best elements of this game, because everything that was playing during my playthrough of this game was fun, you know, exciting, and just fit the mood and the tone of what I was doing so well. So excellent job with the soundtrack, and I think it definitely deserves mention. It's a great track to listen to, and one that I'm going to listen to even outside the game. I also want to discuss the controls in this game. Now, Sonic has suffered immensely in their previous entries with trying to get the controls right. You know, we haven't really had a good solid 3D Sonic game, one that's fully 3D, at least on this scale. I actually did play Sonic 2006 somewhat recently, and that is a game that I'm actually going to do a reminiscing video on in the somewhat near future. But the controls in that game, going from that to this, is like a generational leap. All of the frustrations and everything that I've had with the previous Sonic entries, and in particular that game, have mostly been alleviated here. But what's truly impressive to me is that they give you the ability to change how Sonic actually feels to play. This isn't just sensitivity and camera settings and stuff that normal games have. You can actually adjust his speed during turns, how responsive he is when you move the analog stick a certain way, his speed during, you know, normal platforming when you're not actually sprinting at full speeds. You can basically fine-tune this rodent to be as responsive or as sluggish as you want. And it is incredible just how varied this actually makes the game feel, because, you know, they give you the default controls, and those are fine, those are serviceable, but I spent about an hour just fine-tuning Sonic to exactly how I wanted him to play, and this helped alleviate so many of the frustrations I was kind of having early on. He felt more responsive. He turned exactly during the timing that I needed him to turn. This allowed me to be more accurate with my combat mechanics, especially when you have this new shift ability that basically allows you to draw a ring around an enemy, and anything within that ring actually explodes or basically causes wind damage. But I was able to basically fine-tune the controls to exactly what my turn radius was, how I was actually controlling Sonic with the controller. This is incredible. I've never seen this before in any video game, where you're fundamentally allowed to control how the character feels to play in such a meaningful and dramatic way. And honestly, I can say, and honestly, this is why I can recommend this game to anyone. Even if this is your first Sonic game, you can mess with the controls and get him to play in any way that you'd like, whether you want him to be more responsive and more quick, or more slow and more sluggish to allow for more accurate gameplay, or something that's just more crazy where you can keep up with the pacing of, you know, what the speed that he's going at. It's all in your control. And I just haven't seen this done in any other video game before, and I think it goes a long way in ensuring that whatever your settings are, you're getting the experience that is right for you. However the controls are in the game, they can be fine-tuned in a way that is meaningful and actually works in tandem with your skill set as a player. This is phenomenal, and I just can't speak enough praise about it. You know, I don't see a lot of people talking about this during their reviews or during their gameplay, and I think that, you know, what it really shows is that a lot of people don't really enter the settings menu before they start playing games. This is something I do with every game I play. I always fine-tune the settings, make sure my video quality is perfect, my sound quality is perfect, everything's calibrated to what the game recommends. And yeah, you know, if I'm playing a shooter or, you know, a platforming game like this and I want more responsive controls or camera and stuff, then I'll go in there and try to adjust what I need to make it a more playable experience for me. But I just have never seen anything quite on the level of this game, especially because it's not window dressing. It really matters and changes up the entire feeling of how Sonic is in this game. So that should qualm any concerns that you may have jumping into this game, whether you're a new player or a returning player. I mean, take it from someone like myself who hasn't played a Sonic game in over 10 years. Jumping into this, I was able to jump in here, have him control the way I wanted to, and I was having a blast because the game is really, really fun on its own anyway. So this is a surprise to me. You know, I've seen a lot of mixed opinions on this game. Yeah, you know, it's a platformer. It's not going to appeal for everyone. And there are things I did dislike. Some of the level design I feel could have been laid out a little bit better. Sonic unfortunately can get stuck on some of the geometry, and you also don't have control of the camera at all times, and so as you're boosting through railings, if the game decides to switch to like a cinematic camera, sometimes you could fly off way past the landing pad of where you're trying to go, and unfortunately, you know, fall to your death and you have to do it over again. And I also want to speak on the very ending of this game. The game basically pads itself out an additional 2 hours for honestly no reason whatsoever. It's just kind of being annoying. We've seen this a lot with sort of legacy older titles, especially from like the mid-2000s, and unfortunately this game is kind of plagued with that, where the very end took me an additional 2 hours than it probably needed to in order to actually collect enough of these items that I needed to in order to progress the story. So I didn't care for the very ending of this game. I felt that it kind of ruined the pacing, as well as just made those sort of final hours a little bit more frustrating than they were rewarding. And I also need to touch upon the technical complexity of this game. Unfortunately, this game is a mess. It's not buggy per se, but the technical nature of the way it's built seems to have problems and is distracting at times. By now, you've probably heard that this game has severe pop-in on all systems. For reference, the gameplay that you're watching is on Xbox Series X in its performance mode. The game boots in its default graphics mode, which is 4K 30 frames per second, but it's an uneven frame rate. Playing this in performance mode, there were dips into the 50s at times, but I have a FreeSync TV and that helped clear up a lot of the issues. In fact, I wasn't really noticing it during my average play. But yeah, if you don't have a FreeSync television, you're going to notice some stuttering even on the performance mode. The real issue though is that the engine has a major issue with level of detail management. Basically, what this translates to in your game experience is popping out the ass. Almost everything you're seeing in the distance, even stuff that is relatively close to Sonic, is going to pop in and fade in if it hasn't already. In fact, most of the large scaling rail systems are actually still remain in view even when you're far away from their position. But a lot of the challenges and just the overall puzzles and side objectives basically pop into view extremely close to the camera, to the point where it's kind of distracting. I was very disappointed to see this because the game is quite good, but unfortunately from a technical perspective, it just falls short almost immediately when you start playing. We have to keep in mind that this game released on 8 different platforms. It's on last gen, it's on current gen, it's on the Switch, it's on the PC, and even on the Xbox Series X, technically the most powerful console out there. This game really feels like a last gen game on the technical front in all regards. Now that I pointed it out, you can probably see it on screen right now. All the draw distance and objects that pop into view relatively close to the camera. There's nothing you can do to alleviate this. You don't get different, LOD transitions if you go to the graphics mode of this game. And even seeing PC footage, this is an issue that actually plagues that system as well. So it's a problem with their engine. It's a core engine issue. And I feel that, if they're gonna ever kind of continue with a Sonic game in this sort of structure, they need to really repurpose and update their engine to allow for better LOD transitions. LOD transitions is something that has been in games for a very long time, and I feel like if Sonic Team could have done to their engine to allow for a low detailed, distant object that would still be on screen at all times, but would just load in the higher detailed model when you get close to it, it could have been a lot less distracting. Overall, I don't think it took away from the core experience of the game, meaning that I was still able to have fun with the game despite these issues. It was just really disappointing to see when you spend your money on a next-gen system like this and you see a game, a very good game at that, which is makes it even more frustrating, still resorting to some very obsolete tactics such as this. Again, I want to make sure I point this out because on the technical front, I don't think this game is really so special. It feels and looks like a last generation game, even on the Xbox Series X where you truly expect to have a better experience. Unfortunately, it's just not there. But despite all of that, I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised with Sonic Frontiers. It was a joy to play almost the entire way through. The scale of the bosses and the levels felt fun and rewarding and were epic as well. And the game only took me 16 hours to fully complete. Again, if the game didn't have, that extra padding at the very end, it could have been under 15 hours. But even with that, I have to say that I did enjoy playing the game quite a lot, and I was glad that I didn't skip out on this. So if you're like me and you haven't played a Sonic game in over a decade at this point, or if it's been even longer and you're just, wondering if Sonic Frontiers is the game that's going to kind of bring you back, or maybe you're new to, Sonic in general, I feel that this is a forward-looking game for the franchise. Definitely was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be, and it mixes the classic elements that people loved from the previous Sonic games, especially on the old Sega consoles, with something new and exciting and interesting for this franchise. So those are my thoughts on Sonic Frontiers. For anyone else who has also played the game, let me know what you thought as well. If you're, on the fence about this game, I'd say definitely pick it up. This game went for almost dirt cheap immediately after it came out. I actually picked this game up for 29 bucks during the Black Friday sale at Walmart. So this game goes on sale quite quickly, and it's only been out in this case for less than a month, which is insane. I've never seen a game get this cheap before. But honestly, I'm hoping that this game actually finds success, and I think it's going to be one of those games that's going to turn into a cult classic over time. But anyway, enough from me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Looking forward to hearing what you all say in the comments, and have a great day.